Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Kardos, and today our lesson is going to be on the topic of absolute value. It's kind of a funny sounding word, so take a minute, say that word to yourself, make sure you can pronounce it clearly. The vocabulary term is absolute value. So our learning target for today is that we're going to be able to find the absolute value of a number using a number line. So we're going to work on using a number line today as demonstrated by the successful completion of some practice problems. So to start with, I just want to review for a second. We've been working with integers. We've had some basic introduction to integers, which is what we're also going to be working with today. Absolute value will work with more than just integers, but for our purposes today, which are pretty basic and introductory, we're just going to stick with integers. So integers are a set of numbers consisting of all the negative whole numbers, all the positive whole numbers, and zero. And remember, a key phrase there is they're whole numbers, okay? So no fractions and no decimals. But again, absolute value will work with fractions and decimals, but for our purposes, we're just going to stick with the integers, the whole numbers. And there was our visual representation of integers in case you have forgotten. Negatives, zeros, and the positives. And notice there are no fractions or decimals on our number line. So remember that when you're finding the distance between 2 points, you're going to count the hops or the spaces, not the black lines between them. So this is a common mistake that I see students make when we're working on absolute value, because we're going to be counting the distance between two numbers. So lots of times students will count these black lines in between point A and B, and they'll tell me that the answer is 4, but that is not correct. Okay, don't count the black lines, you're going to count the hops. So let's jump into our material for today. Absolute value, what is it? Well, the absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on the number line. Now, there are other instances once you get higher up in math where we won't be talking about 0, but for our purposes, we're just going to be talking about the distance from 0 on the number line. So an example of a question that you might see would look like this. What is the absolute value of 3? So my two important numbers on my number line are going to be the 3 and the 0. Okay, I want to find the distance that 3 is from 0 on the number line. So I'm just going to count the hops. There are 3 hops from 3 to 0. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. That would be my answer. Well, what about if it's negative 3, Miss Kardos? What's the absolute value of negative 3? Same thing. The two important numbers that I'm talking about are going to be the negative 3, and it's asking me, when it asks me what is the absolute value of a number, it's asking me how far is that number from 0, or how many hops do I have to take to get to 0. So that's the other important number. So how many hops would I have to take from negative 3 to 0? The answer is 3. Okay, so the absolute value, let's review that. The absolute value of positive 3 was 3, and the absolute value of negative 3 is also 3. Those two are opposites on the number line. They're the same distance from 0, so it would take me 3 hops to get to 0. So sometimes you're going to see these bars around the number, okay? These bars right here. You're going to see them around the number. And those bars are basically a shortcut. They make it so that we don't have to write the words absolute value over and over and over again. Instead, we can just use these two bars. So when you see those two straight up bars, you know they're asking you what's the absolute value of that number. They are not parentheses. They're a different kind of grouping symbol. Okay, so this question says, and remember, look at your notes, okay? You try it first, think it through. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and do that. Use the number line there on the screen in front of you if you need it. think about what the absolute value of the number 8 would be. Okay, so here's the number 8 on my number line, and I want to know how many hops does it take to get from 8 to 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So the absolute value of 8 is 8. It would take me 8 hops to get to 0. All right, you try this one. Think it through, come up with an answer. It's asking you, what is the absolute value of -7? So our two important numbers, -7 and 0, we want to see how many hops would it take for us to get, okay, from -7 to 0, and the answer is 7. It would take us 7 hops to get to 0. Tricky one. The absolute value of 0. Well, if I'm already on 0, I don't have to hop anywhere, do I? My answer would just be 0. And remember, 0 is an integer, but it is neither positive nor negative. It's just 0. Okay, this one says +1. Remember, even though we don't write the little plus sign right here, we still consider that to be a +1. And hopefully you said the answer would be 1. It is 1 hop away from 1 to 0. All right, last one like this. Absolute value of -2. It would take us 2 hops to get to 0. All right, let's take a minute and let's level it up a little bit. Not a lot, but we do want to think it through a little bit further. So we can use absolute value when we are comparing the value of numbers. We're comparing the magnitude of two numbers. So this question is asking me which is greater, the absolute value of -23 or the absolute value of 4. So in order to be able to do this, I have to figure out what is the absolute value of -23 and what is the absolute value of 4. Well, it would take me 23 hops to get to 0, and on this side, it would take me 4 hops to get to 0. So the absolute value of -23 is greater. Remember, the little alligator mouth always wants to eat the bigger number, so the absolute value of -23 is greater. Okay, here's another one. Take a minute, think it through. So the absolute value of -9 would be 9. The absolute value of -10 would be 10. So the absolute value of -10 is greater. Now, I want you to remember that this is different than the answer would have been if there were no absolute value bars. If there were no absolute value bars, then my answer would be this way. -9 would be bigger. But because we have those absolute value bars, it's changing our answer. Which is greater? The absolute value of -5 or the absolute value of +3? Well, if there were no absolute value bars, we would say it's the 3. But I have those absolute value bars. So the absolute value of -5 is 5, and the absolute value of 3 is 3. So this is actually my answer. The absolute value of -5 is greater. All right, so we're back to our learning target. So we definitely accomplished our goal today. We can now find the absolute value of a number using a number line. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And remember, a little progress each day adds up to big results. Bye, and I'll see you guys in the next video.